Another new feature in Photoshop CC that photographers should get a lot of mileage from is the new shake reduction filter. And this does basically what it sounds like. It helps you to eliminate the slight amount of blur that can be caused by a small camera shake. So for example, you may have your camera on a tripod and it gets bumped slightly by the remote cord or some other part of your gear, or maybe you've got your camera braced up against a tree or something like that, and you've got it almost perfectly still, but not quite. In those situations, you can end up with a photograph that's mostly sharp, but has a slight amount of blur in different parts of the frame that can't be taken care of by ACR and other sharpening tools. So that's what this is for. And it's important to note ahead of time, and I'll go ahead and mention this because this is a two-part tutorial, so I've got a little bit of extra time here. This is not a substitute for good focusing practices. This doesn't mean you can go out with your camera and just sort of handhold everything and not pay attention to how still the camera is, and then come back and get great results. This only works on photographs that are mostly sharp to begin with, but which cannot be further sharpened by the traditional tools. So let's take a look at this. If we go to the Layers panel, I've got a shake reduction layer set up, so we're not working on the background. And I've got this set up as a smart filter or smart object layer, so we can go back into the filter and change the results if we need to. So I'll go to the filter menu and I'll choose Sharpen Shake Reduction. This will open the shake reduction window, and you'll notice at the top left we've got a number of tools here, including a traditional pan tool and a zoom tool, but most of the time you'll only need to use the one that's selected by default here at the top. And also you'll notice by default that Photoshop automatically selects a region in your photograph and starts to analyze that and see what's sharp and what's blurry. And the amount of sharpening and the amount of artifacts and other things are determined by these three settings here in the blur trace settings, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. But before you do anything else, here's the setup that I think makes a lot of sense. You'll want to, first of all, boost your main preview up to 50%, okay? So you've got a good sense of the details, but you're not so far zoomed in that you can't get a sense of the broader image. Then down here in the detail panel, this acts kind of like a loop. And you'll see at the bottom we can view this at 1x, 2x, 4x, and so on. So I would choose to view this at 100%. So we're basically viewing the same areas at two different magnifications at the same time as we go along. Now the next step that I usually do is I don't accept the default blur estimation region. That's this entire square area and everything within it. And you can turn that on and off incidentally by clicking on the Show Blur Estimation region. But what I'll typically do is I'll first crunch it down a little bit and then move it into place. So what I like to do here, I know that these areas on the rocks are one of the areas that was close to the focus point, and that's what you really want to do. You want to put the box on an area that you know is supposed to be very sharp, and if possible, you want to avoid putting anything inside the box that is moving in the scene, right? So we've got some tree branches up here, we've got moving water. Those are the kinds of things you don't want to put inside the blur estimation region because it will basically trip Photoshop up. Photoshop is looking for things that are supposed to be perfectly still. So if you put something that's moving there, it's going to cause problems. So I'm going to go ahead and move this down so the bottom edge is across the bottom of this rock right here. And then I'm going to basically take the handles and crunch the size of this way down. I'll pinch it in here a little bit as well. Generally, you don't want this area to be too large because it can cause problems when Photoshop is trying to identify the areas of sharpness. So what we've got here is a good situation. We've got some high contrast areas, and you'll notice I've got a crosshair here. So if I click in the center there, whatever you click, that's what will end up inside the detail panel. So you can see These leaves here have a high contrast in the wet and dark part of the rock. The leaves in the rock and even the different boulders have some contrast, and they have some moss and things on them that are contrasting. So the more you can do that, the better off you're going to be. You want to choose a still subject that's in the focus zone, and hopefully something that has a little bit of contrast to the background. Now you'll notice another thing, and that is whenever you change the size of the marquee or move things around, things reprocess. And we've got two different types of previews here. I'll go ahead and do this again just so you can see it. I'll bump it in. Now notice up at the top here, we've got a coarse preview, and then we've got a fine preview. And a lot of times, if you've got a larger image or a more complex correction going on, it can take a while for that coarse preview to go away. And the coarse preview, by definition, is going to show you a lot of sort of grainy looking structures and pixels. And it's not really a good way to judge the results of what's happening in the filter. So wait for that fine preview.